and I'll hit record and the mic is yours. You're muted, Alicia.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Amplify for co-hosting this event with us at Future Work Initiative. Again, my name is Alicia McLean. I'm Director of Community and Education Initiatives with the Future of Work. I'm also the founder of a nonprofit called Technique, which is technology education to create change. And I'm also working on a PhD, working on my dissertation around specifically Black women in technology leadership. And so I'm saying all that to say that what we're talking about today is very much near and dear to my heart, as it should be near and dear to all of our hearts. And so I'm so excited to introduce the panel that we have with us. And rather than introducing them myself, I'd like to pass the mic to you all and give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. So first we have on my screen here, I have Kiana Baker from Elephant in the Room. Kiana, would you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kiana Baker, and I am co-founder of DEI consulting company called Elephant in the Room. You'll meet my other co-founder here in a second. I'm very happy to be here to be a part of this conversation. It's obviously near and dear to my heart as well. And I'm excited to be joined by all the other ladies here and get some good insight out there and receive some. So,
thank you, Kiana. And I will go ahead and introduce your partner in crime, Sharina.
Hello. So I too am excited to be here. I am also co-founder of the Elephant in the Room. What we do is we create comfortable spaces to have uncomfortable conversations. We actually built our company around creating inclusive work culture. So this is kind of like, this is fun for us. So we're excited.
Thank you, Sharina. And next I see Michelle Shelton of Shelton Holdings.
There we go. We're unmuted. Good afternoon, everyone. It's fantastic to be here, and I am super excited to be joining this very distinguished panel to join you all in conversation today. I'm Michelle Shelton, CEO of Shelton Holdings, LLC, and we work with organizations to help courageous leaders make equity and inclusion more than just a goal. But primarily, we do that by confronting and conquering the isms that threaten both our humanity and the bottom line. So talking about this particular topic at this particular time is absolutely critical. And just thank you to Amplify Louisville and the Future of Work Initiative for inviting me here today.
Certainly, thank you for being here, Michelle. And last but certainly not least, Dr. Johnson of Visionarium and MEMSTEM.
Oh, wonderful. It's Dr. Angelique Johnson, CEO and founder of MEMSTEM, which is a tech startup in the med device space. And then here kind of representing Visionarium, CEO and founder of that company. And Visionarium truly is about enabling primarily entrepreneurs of color and those who care about entrepreneurs of color, whether they are founders or whether they're entrepreneurs at corporate entities, really facilitating leadership training, entrepreneurial training, vision training around that. And as a part of that training, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really very near and dear, of course, my heart, being a Black female in tech, but also in the startup community. So we really focus in on startup ecosystems, really companies that are small but growing fast, and making sure that they are growing correctly in terms of culture and climate as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So, I mean, we could just take, first of all, this is just amazing. I mean, I'm just gonna, be real here. Like, this is incredible. I feel like this is a conversation among friends. So excited to have everybody here and to have so many people that are here and interested in this important work. And so the description of this session is creating a welcoming space for diversity of thought. And Michelle, I wanted to start with something that you said, which was addressing the isms. Can you expand a little bit more on those isms, what they are, and why do we need to address them?
Absolutely. One of the two areas that we focus on primarily with the work that we do around consulting, training, education, and even coaching is racism and sexism. Primarily when it comes to DEI in and of itself, this field has been around since the 70s, came about after we had all of our achievements through the civil rights movement. And of course, folks were gaining through equal employment opportunity legislation, access, if you will, to the workplace. But what we discovered is while folks were being able to finally join the workplaces, the experience that they were having and truly having access to the full enjoyment of what should come with being employed across this country wasn't happening for people of color, Black people in particular. And I'll, in a lot of my comments, focus on the Black community because, of course, being a Black woman, that is my primary experience and where my heart lies. However, I care about all of humanity, which is why I do this work, and more importantly, our ability to be able to get beyond the isms, the racism, the sexism, and any other ism that creates barriers and interferes with our ability to be able to engage one another. These conversations haven't happened in the workplace because they've been sort of taboo subjects. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, people are fine talking about religion. They're okay talking about even more today, sexual orientation and gender identity. We can talk about even gender a little more than we used to. But when it comes to the subject of race, that's when people clam up. They don't really want to talk about it. It makes folks who are not members of the Black community and other communities of color uncomfortable. And since those are the folks who are in leadership, you know, in overwhelming numbers in many of our organizations, and who are definitely present when it comes to making the decisions in those organizations, race gets left off the table when we're having this discussion. So one of the things that we challenge our folks to do is talk about the things that need to be talked about. One of the reasons I started my company was because when I was in organizations and I would talk about the issue of race and call out things as they were and expect a response and progress, I was labeled as confrontational, the angry Black woman, the problem, the one who folks needed to watch out for, who was dangerous. So I said, okay, fine, if you won't allow me to talk about it in this space and in the roles that you brought me in to serve and support, then I'll go out and create an organization on my own and do that. Because as an entrepreneur, I'm crazy enough, as many of us are, to have the audacity to think that we can show up innovatively and intentionally and do things in ways that they haven't been done before, and it will work. So as you can imagine, I'm happy to be here talking with entrepreneurs today, because we have got to make sure that we are continuing to press and encourage other people to embrace risk. And as we look at the risks that are involved in talking about race in our organizations and racism in particular, and how it's impacted our inability to be able to hold true to the promises that we make that everyone in this country is equal, then we will never be able to get to where it is that we are supposed to be and maintain both our integrity on an individual level, a country level, and within our organizations.
Okay, and that will actually conclude our whole session. This is a great start to this session. And I specifically want to focus in on something that you said is, first of all, talking about the things that need to be talked about, and then also entrepreneurship and the audacity, I love that word, the audacity to show up and think that despite the barriers, we can come in and have our own ideas and thrive in those ideas. And for that question, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Johnson. You know, a lot of our focus with the future of work and with my focus personally is, you know, increasing the number of marginalized groups that are participating in STEM-related fields. And so here we have a product of not our work, but I don't want to say you're a product of work, but I'm saying that you exemplify sort of what we're wanting to, we want to create more Dr. Johnsons in some ways. That's all our work around it. So, but I'd like, Dr. Johnson, if you wouldn't mind talking about your experience first of being a Black woman in a STEM field with a PhD in a STEM field, and also being an entrepreneur. Tell us about your experiences, if you don't mind.
Sure. My gosh. Well, it's definitely one of one. I got my PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Michigan. But before that, I got my undergraduate degree from University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, in computer engineering and math. In college, I didn't experience things quite as bad as I did in grad school, because in college I was part of a African-American, was actually open to all races, all genders, but the primary focus of the scholarship was to increase the number of African-Americans who go on to get their PhD in STEM fields. So I had a lot of colleagues, you know, maybe whether they were in my class or not, I community of STEM individuals that were African American. But when I got to grad school, it was very different. Michigan, I'm only the third African American female to have graduated from the PhD program in electrical engineering in the whole history of Michigan. And that is actually pretty good because my good close friend who graduated around the same time I did is the first African American female to graduate with her PhD in computer science from University of Michigan. So we're still doing a lot of firsts. So my experiences, you name it, I've experienced it. Let's see, racism, sexism, sexual assault, all these things that you have to endure that I don't want this next generation to have to endure, especially coming up. And so I'm glad we have programs like the one that you guys are doing, Alicia, and really that organizations like Microsoft are pushing so that we don't have to do that. But even beyond those, I mean, I have a PhD, but I think what I like, especially about the movement now, is that people are not waiting for individuals to get degrees. You really can train anybody at any level. They don't need a college degree. We have interns that come through MEMSTEM all the time. They have not finished a college degree. We actually had a few interns that weren't even, they were under college age, and we put them to work and trained them. We're doing probably about as high tech as you can possibly think of, nanotechnology. So if we can do it, then there's no barriers for anybody to do it.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Great response. And I want to come back to the second part that you talked about degrees and stackable credentials and skills-based versus credentials-based. The one thing I want to say, though, is, the one thing I want to hit on right now is what you said about being one of one. And a lot of times when companies think about their diversity targets, they'll look and say, well, we've got a Black woman here, or we've got a Black person here, or we've got, a Latinx person here. Why is one not enough? And I'd like to turn this question to Kiana and Sharina. Maybe I'll start with Kiana. I don't want you all to think like you're a package and like you both, that's me. We'll start with Kiana. Why is one not enough? What are some of the responses you have to, when people are thinking about their diversity numbers and checking those boxes? We hope they're not, but sometimes that's what's going on. So yes, if you can address that, why is one not enough?
One is not enough because we're not a monolith, and that goes for being Black, being Latin, being a woman. We have different experiences, right? We've grown up differently. We've had different work experiences, different professional paths, and school paths, and all of those things. And so having one only brings you one of those perspectives. And it's important, especially in decision-making roles, because a lot of the time when you go into companies and they do have diversity, those people are not in the decision-making roles. They're not in leadership roles, they're not executives, And so when it comes to having people in those leadership roles, it's important to have different perspectives. That's how you avoid becoming, what I like to say, the Gucci of your prospective industry, right? They don't have people in leadership roles, and then they ended up making an entire sweater that looked like blackface, right? And they could have avoided that had they had different perspectives in those types of positions. So that's why it's important to have multiples. One is not enough. It's not ever going to be enough, and it's not ever okay to think that you have reached some sort of diversity or inclusive milestone just by having one.
Sharina, just want to turn it over to you, obviously.
So from the other standpoint of one not being enough, it's how you're making that person feel at work by being one. And so you have to look at that perspective, and you have to say, how does it feel to be the only one in the room? And I'm sure that we've all experienced that. And sometimes as being Black, being a woman, and walking into some places that like, there's nobody in the room that looks like you. It's automatically at the first toe that steps foot in the door, right? You're automatically just a little bit uncomfortable. You automatically go into a state of, am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? And imagine being in that same state of mind every day. That alone is stressful. And while it might be a stress that you might not notice, right? After you've been through it so many times, it's stressful. You go home and you're like, oh, I got to let my hair down. And so that's one aspect of it. But like Kiana said, like being the only one says that everybody's going to come to you, right? Everybody's going to come to you for advice. That's tiring because you're not a token. It's like, no, there's plenty more like me where I come from, so that's one thing. And then also understanding that, like she said, we don't all share the same experiences. So while on the outside I'm Black, I have a unique experience in that, like, I come from a Hispanic Latino family, so my experience being Black might be totally different than somebody who grew up in the South. Or, so there's so many aspects of being Black. It's never enough. It's never enough to have just one Black person in a company. It's never enough to have one woman. Never enough to have one man. Like, you really truly have to be diverse if you really want to reach the people you say you want to reach. You can't just be at the table and say, oh, well, we have one and this one speaks for all. Because most of the time, we have a habit of choosing people, even if they don't look like us, right? We have we usually choose people who do something like us. There's some type of mirror effect there. So we have to be careful that when we go out and we choose, or maybe at a predominantly white company, I'll just say, that you're not choosing the one Black person who you think should be in that position because maybe they were adopted by a white family, or they have more experiences with white people, or things of that nature. So that's why you can't just hire one, because we have too many experiences, and to say like, oh, that one is just enough. It's not. It's never enough. So it's like having what is it, a Pringle can. Once you pop, the fun don't stop. You have to not let it stop.
This is the takeaway. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is like a Pringles can. Once you pop, you just can't stop. So I want to specifically on what you talked about, Sharina and Kiana, talking about the myriad of experiences that we have and that we bring to the table. I want to ask Dr. Johnson a question. My focus in my research is around identity and authentic leadership. And as someone who has led 2 organizations, there's probably like 7 more knowing you that I just haven't caught up with you to find out about. But to what extent, or can you speak on how your identity, and maybe we'll go beyond as a Black woman, but how your identity as Dr. Angelique Johnson influences your ability and your leadership style in the organizations that you lead?
Yeah, so in terms of identity, I identify as Black first and foremost, because that's what people see when they see me. I know there's a lot of talk about intersectionality, but I'm just going to be, especially here in Kentucky. So, and then secondary to that, I identify obviously as being a woman. That's my, identification. And so, and then there's the whole training aspect, right? So when I come into the room, I'm an expert on something. I mean, I guess that's the definition of being a doctorate. You're an expert in something, and you pick up more expertise as you go around. So my identity when I walk into a room, it used to be one of imposter syndrome, like, oh, I'm the odd person out, and so my identity was more so. Some of the other speakers are talking about this feeling of, well, now I have to kind of be uber aware of my personality and this and that and the other. The longer I've been in this space, the more my identity now is when I walk into the room, because I know my own inherent value, it's just like, who's going to get this value, So yeah, I can take turns, and decide what are you going to grab for me? So I there's a professor at University of Louisville, Nat Irvin. I don't know if anybody, for many people know him, very well known. And he had asked a question one time when I was mentoring some young African-American females that wanted to be engineers. And he said, tell them what it feels like to be a Black woman, in tech. And I wanted to kind of go with the tagline of, well, it's, I have to climb through the muck and mire to get to work every day. And good Lord, I hate it. But I thought about it, I was like, it feels really good. Like when I walk in the room now, as that I own myself, it feels really good. You feel like, wow, when I walk, I just feel so confident. And the interesting thing was the young ladies, they picked up on that and they were like, yeah, that's how we feel too, actually. So I think the narrative that because I may be one of one, I have to feel less. I don't think that's it. I think now we're identifying that we're actually unicorns. And yes, I hope there's be more unicorns of us, but there's something to that as well.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I like what you said about now that I own myself. And I don't know about the rest of I don't want to speak because on behalf of everybody else, because we are not a monolith, but for myself personally, that owning of myself has been a lifetime journey and continues to be a journey. And like you, Dr. Johnson, I love being the unicorn in some ways. It's really, I think what I'm trying to say is that the identity and the experiences in the community that we bring to the table is so rich and so needed that it's everybody else's gain. Everybody gains from having, you know, more diversity at the table, from popping those Pringles. So Michelle, I wanted to go back to you because what we've heard is identity. What we've heard is that one is not enough. What practical advice do we want to give to companies around creating an inclusive environment where people's identities can thrive, where people can start to feel appreciated for their identity and not feel like they have to step outside of that identity in order to merge with company and cultural or the company's cultural values? What do we need to, what do we need companies to hear when they hire us?
Sure, sure. Well, when they hire us, and I would say, what do companies need to know about what it means to be a company that honors and acts with integrity around appreciating, showing appreciation and opportunities for the inclusivity that we have within our communities. But before I go there, Alicia, if you could grant me a little bit of privilege, because I want to get back to this question about the one, the only one, because I've had plenty of experiences with that myself. And, you know, when you ask the question of why is one not enough, my question is, how dare you think that one should be enough? You know, we should not have to wait for people to come to a place to where they recognize that we are valuable and that we can offer and that we are worthy enough to be a part of their organizations. Any organization that claims to be diverse and only has one, whether it's on your senior leadership team, whether it's on your board of directors, whether it's in a manager, people leader role, how dare you? You need to educate yourself and make sure that you understand what diversity is in and of itself. Diversity is not one person of color. That's not what it is. Diversity has several dimensions to it, as we learn when we talk about the dimensions of diversity that impact every aspect of who we are, the makeup of all of us as individuals. You can have folks who have different experiences, who show up in different ways through the way that the race and community and their economic status intersect in their lives. That in and of itself can be diversity. But you know, what comes to mind for me when I think about this experience of being the one? I graduated from the University of Louisville with a degree in political science. And while I was there as a student, you know, every day I was the only one in many of my political science classes. I was a McConnell Scholar and a Woodford R. Porter Scholar. So you can imagine the intersection of those two experiences. I was a McConnell Scholar, the first African-American from Jefferson County to be accepted into that program because I wanted to study political science and go into law, government, one or the other, right? And I remember the first day I showed up on campus to interview for that particular program. I showed up at the door and another scholar who looked at me, many of whom were from rural areas in Kentucky, who had come to the University of Louisville through that program and had never been in the same space with a Black person. They'd only seen us on television or heard about the conversations, overheard comments and racial epithets from family members. So they already had preconceived notions about us. And I remember I stepped into Grawemeyer Hall, the administration building at the University of Louisville, and they looked at me and said, "Oh, you've got this, you're Black." That was the worst thing they could have said to me, because the audacity of them to assume that I could only be in that particular program because I was a Black person and they needed to check a box was enough to make sure for me that they knew once they selected me, because after I heard that, there would be no doubt I would be accepted into the program because I would go in and just do what I do, and that is be me. And it's critical for us to understand the importance of us knowing who we are, showing up in the fullness of that, and recognizing that that alone is enough. But in that program, I sat in class, of course, I was accepted into it, and I sat in class day in and day out. And I heard people talk about us and what they thought about us. In that particular time, Central High School was going through a transition. Parents were protesting because they had quota systems in place that caused them to lose some of the Black teachers. And I remember sitting in class, and there was a white male who made the comment of, it's amazing, you know, Brown versus Board of Education gave them access and opportunity to go to whatever school they want. Yet they still, these Black people, oh, excuse me, when he realized I was in the room, these African Americans still want to go to their schools that are always insufficient and inadequate. And, you know, I looked at him and I said, let me explain something to you. I said, brother, please feel free to speak openly and honestly, because that's the only way I know where you're coming from. I am clear about who I am. So however you feel you need to reference this community, feel free to do that. And if you make a mistake, I'm happy to clarify for you. But I remember going back to my dorm in Louisville Hall, and I called up a mentor and I said, I am just so exhausted. Speaking to Kiana and Sharina's points, I'm so exhausted of feeling like I always have to speak for the entire community. And one of my mentors at the time, Jeannie Unseld, said to me, if you don't, who will? If you don't, who will? And I realized the amazing opportunity that I had, the privilege that it was to be able to sit in that space, stand in that space every day, and allow them to see that there is diversity even within the Black community. We are not all one type of person. So to your point about being in this space and thinking about what companies need to do, recognize that we are not all one type of person. And if you define diversity by only having one within your organization, again, you need to go back to the table and understand and learn what diversity and inclusivity really is, what it is supposed to look like for your organization. Educate yourselves on that, and then make a commitment. Make a commitment that says, you know what, we are going to recognize, value, and respect the breadth that comes with being able to engage the Black community and other communities of color. We're going to recognize and respect that there are limitless value that can be brought into our organization by tapping in to these bases and making sure that we are truly honoring what it is that we are here to do. Your mission, vision, values aren't enough. There has to be intentionality around defining what inclusivity looks like within your organization and being deliberate, doggedly deliberate and determined to make sure that you're getting out there and you're taking full advantage of the resources that are available to you through these communities. Your greatest asset as an organization is not your profit margin. It's not even your product line. It's the people who sign up to help you achieve your vision. So recognize when they bring their skills and their talents and their gifts, that you've got an obligation or responsibility to make sure you give them the opportunity to be all that they are, to show up authentically around that.
Thank you, Michelle. Sharina, I want to ask you something that was brilliantly said, and I want to build on that. In your work, Sharina, with Elephant in the Room, tell me about some of the companies, the culture that maybe you've helped them to create or that they have created so that people, to Michelle's point, excuse me, are able to bring their full selves to work.
So I guess I'll start with how we go about creating those work cultures. Number one is we never come in talking at anybody, we come in talking to. So a lot of the times we immerse ourselves in the workshop with you. And so we're not throwing numbers at you, because like I could throw a bunch of numbers at you all day, every day, right? And that doesn't really mean anything. We all know numbers. We know that, like, we can get a lot more accomplished with a lot more diverse team. We already know that. But do you know the experience of the people that you work with? How are they feeling? Like, are you really in tune and in touch? And so in the workshops, I always say, when you go to lunch, who do you sit with? Right? That's like, lunch is like a really big deal, from everywhere, from being in school to being in corporate America, right? Like, you'll see that, like, people go to, like, who they're comfortable with at lunch. And it's like, well, you spend all day with this person in your cubicle. What would make you not want to go to lunch with that person? So we try to do it more so as like talking with them, and giving them an authentic experience with their and their peers. And so through that, I think that we see that, like, people end up opening up. They end up maybe telling their personal stories, their background stories about where they come from as as an individual, and understanding that, wow, okay, I didn't realize that me and so had that much in common. And it's like, aha, that's what we were trying to tell you. Like, there's a lot more to people than just the color of their skin. You know what I'm saying? Or there's we are diverse in all aspects, and that's what we do with the elephant in the room, is just to try to show that all the aspects of diversity, whether that's your experience of you being a woman, you being Black, you growing up on this side of town versus that side of town, and whatever. And so we're able to like change those work cultures through sharing experiences, and then we can talk about numbers, right? Like we can talk about numbers after we really do the core work. Like people are we thrive off of storytelling. That's what we do. We want to know the story behind the brand, behind the person. How did they become that way? We want to know all of those things. So that's kind of where we dive in, and where we're able to change the culture is by storytelling, sharing experiences. We also share through laughter. We make sure that we're playing some type of video or something that makes people laugh, because most of the time you can find a universal joke that everybody's going to laugh at, and you're like, oh, okay, we do laugh together, so just finding everybody and meeting everybody at like a common ground, just a common meeting point, and showing everybody in that workspace that we all kind of have something in common. We all have something different, but the reason that we're here and why you need to hire more is because look at how unique we are just in this space alone. Imagine how unique we could become if we really made a commitment to doing this.
Thank you, Sharina. And I hope that through this panel and through the voicing of our experiences, that the people who are listening and watching see just what a complex issue this is. And I was just thinking about what Dr. Johnson was saying about her experience. And for me personally, my experience growing up was basically be as approachable as possible. Basically, if you wanted to define it, I was taught to assimilate. And obviously I have privileges I come with privilege. I have light skin. I grew up in a 2-parent home. I have attained certain educational and socioeconomic levels that come with privilege. And I think what's interesting is that in the process of loving yourself and loving your full self, that's very difficult. I'm touching on Black feminist thought here, but in a world that does not love us, and I'm sure there's people that are hearing that are saying like, what do you mean by that? But from every angle, we are not encouraged to be us as Black women in particular. And so I made the mistake actually of asking for practical advice for companies who are trying to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I really should have said is talk about the process that you all as experts move through with a company, because this is not an easy issue. And that's the point we're trying to make with it is not checking a box. It is not, like Dr. Johnson's empowered, so we don't really have to create an inclusive space for her because she's already created it for herself. It's not like it's not either or, it's both. It's both and so the biggest takeaway I think is, and I'm coming to questions here in a second, but the biggest takeaway I think is that there is a necessity for the services that the people on this panel are bringing. So if you could just sort of walk us through, and I'll ask each one of you guys, and it looks like Dr. Johnson is unmuted. So just walk us through the process that you use with companies to talk about these issues.
Yeah, I think in the startup ecosystem, we have unique challenges. We think a lot different than larger corporations. We're always trying to run as slim as possible and as fast as possible. We cut corners like nobody else. Let's be honest about it. We are, captain, we can do it on our own. We don't need to hire anybody to do it. And so for me, the process actually starts kind of in 2 ways. The first one is you need to admit you have a problem. I mean, it's just the same. You would never take somebody serious that had a, substance abuse problem that said that A, was willing to admit it, And B, once they were willing to at least admit they had a problem, said, well, I can figure it out on my own. I'll take care of my own. I'm just gonna hole up in my, my house for, about 3 months, and I can work and figure it out. Maybe I can pull in some family members, maybe they might come in. I can Google it, So I think the first step for me is always, especially in the startup community, because we can do it, is getting people to understand that you need to realize that there is a problem in your organization, and you need to be honest, and it's okay. In fact, I don't even use the word problem, it's a challenge, and we all experience this challenge in different ways. Even me as a Black female, I experience the challenge of diversity in my organization, especially in a tech startup. The next thing is, you need some external help with this. Now, I emphasize external because the other thing startups tend to be is relatively small. So if you're relatively small and you just said, help you if you got one, but you probably don't, I hate to say it, but the startup ecosystem is not very diverse, especially when it comes to looking at the personnel. But what I have seen happen is they just look around and say, who's the most diverse person in the company? Okay, you're a diversity, equity, inclusion officer. That's not only insulting to maybe the female employee that you have, or maybe the one Black employee that you have, or the Hispanic, it's insulting to them because it's putting them in a position they never asked to be in. It's not recognizing that there's a skill and experience. There's a training towards this process. If you're gonna have conversations, you should be talking to the elephant in the room. That's who you should hire if you're gonna have these conversations. And so after getting past that, then it really gets down to the practical things. The things that I really like to focus on are how do we get, and I'm really passionate about this, how do we get more technologists in your doorway that are diverse and not using the pipeline as an issue. So I work on strategies of how you can do that. And they're non-traditional. I just talked about how MEMSTEM, what we do is we hire people that don't even have college degrees and we train them. Well, there's a strategy to do that. Where do you find them? When you're doing the interview process, how do you make it sure that it's fair and unbiased? There's a strategy to that. When you hire people that come into your company, in many cases, startups, we are very comfortable with this trial period. Most startups will do this. Whether you are told you're on a trial period or not, you're on a trial period. The kind ones will let you know you're on a trial period, especially if you're younger in your career. Well, during that trial period, there should be a strategy for fostering the growth of all individuals that come to that trial period. What ends up happening sometimes in a lot of these startups, it becomes the survival of the fittest. And people aren't thinking from a diversity, equity, inclusion lens. And when I say strategy, there needs to be an actual formal employee review process, right? An employee development process when people come in your door. If you want to increase the diversity in your organization, it can't be the same old survival of the fittest. So we work with them on those types of applications. And then, of course, we always want to touch on just some of the things people don't really know about. Whether people want to say that they have some understanding or not, we find a lot of people don't know just the basics. What is white supremacy language? What does white supremacy mean in your context? Racism and being racist. It's not the same as maybe you grew up and you thought if someone called me a racist, it was because, I was, lynching people in my backyard. Well, no, there's actually a technical definition for racist, and you may actually fall within that. And also we work with people to understand the generational difference. Diversity, equity, inclusion has changed. The millennial generation has changed diversity, equity, inclusion practices, policies, what's expected by employees that you want to keep that are diverse. You want to keep people that come in your doorway. You want retention. And so we work on getting people to understand the culture of the millennial generations and the generations beneath, and understanding that it's not the same diversity, equity, and inclusion of your parents or your grandparents, or maybe what you grew up in. People now have, thankfully so, are basically done with the foolishness. So I don't know how to put it, but there's no patience for the foolishness. So we really work with people to understand, like, okay, what does that mean though practically? And I'm just a practical person. And so that's really what we're working with people on. It's just to understand at every level, what's the basics? How do you change the culture in your company? How do you put in policies and practices that encourage, foster, and develop diversity in your organization? And how do you understand the basic language and the basic climate that you're operating in?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. I think that maybe elephant in the room, you could have like a tagline that's like, elephant in the room, not your grandma's DE&I. I like that. This is good. This is good. And I really appreciate you pointing out the generational differences and how this group, this new group, they're badass, honestly. Like they're over it. They don't need this job. They will switch to another one. So that's really, really important information. I want to switch to you, Kiana. Tell us about Elephant in the Room and Shireen as well, and what your process is and what people can expect.
Our process is getting people to understand that you cannot skip the process. It's similar to just life in general, right? Everybody wants to get to the win without going through the journey. And the journey is the most important part, because if you don't go through the journey, you're probably not going to keep the win. You're going to fumble the ball. And that's what we try to get people, like, yes, we want to get you to the point where you're doing, so to speak, an audit. We want to get you to the point to where we're addressing where you're recruiting from and all those things. But first, we literally have to address the elephant in the room, the fact that this is an issue, why the fact that this is an issue, and all the other layers that need to be peeled on top of that before we can transition into that. Because you don't know what you don't know, because you don't have to experience it, right? So while all of the, I guess, technical aspects are important, like where you're hiring from, how do people get promoted, why is no one in a leadership position, it's also important for you to understand the storytelling aspect, right? Because while I'm at work as a Black woman, right, you don't understand what it feels like, the fact that I'm sitting here doing my work and I'm watching Breonna Taylor's situation unfold on TV, and I feel like I want to crumble and I'm about to cry. And really, I want to ask you, can I go home? But I don't feel like I have that permission, and no one else is acknowledging it because it doesn't directly affect you and who you are. So like, all of those things need to be addressed before we can get to the, okay, where are you recruiting from? Who's here? Why is no one here? And we start looking at the look of it. We have to address the inclusive part, because they are different. And a lot of people like to address what it looks like and not the feeling behind it and all the other layers. So our process is literally getting you to understand that you do not get to skip the process.
So to piggyback off of that, yes, we literally start with inclusivity. Then we get to talking about diversity more so, right? Because you already got something going on within your company, so just addressing that. So it's inclusivity, then it's the diversity piece of it, then it's the equity, because then we have to discuss that. Okay, so if you're telling me that everybody's included and you're saying you're really diverse, where's the equity at? Like, how come nobody at the top is in a C-suite level position? So we have to do that. So Kiana and I like to say that we have an HR department. It's only Kiana and I, so they're looking at us like, you have how you have an HR department? No, it's HR just stands for keeping it hella real, right? And so one thing that we do within our, we're unapologetically two black women in a room, and we're going to give you the culture while we're talking about this. We give you a real Black girl experience, and we don't sugarcoat anything. The problem that we see within a lot of these companies is people like to sugarcoat stuff, and it's like, no, that's just not going to work. And part of the reason why you haven't addressed the elephant in the room is because you're sugarcoating everything. You're not being real with yourself. In our words, you're not keeping it hella real with yourself. You don't have a real HR department. So that's how we like kind of address it and go about that and get them to understand. But I think that you can get people to understand when you kind of go about it. Like I said, we don't talk at you, we talk to you, and we start where you're at and take you through a complete process that allows you to grow with us while you're in this. It's super interactive. That's the other thing I think a lot of people are missing. Like, it's not interactive enough for you to even feel the work or the lack thereof that you're doing, and when you don't have to. So we try to make it as interactive as possible, and so that people can have their aha moment and say, That's what we were doing wrong. We just should have addressed the elephant in the room the whole way, the whole time we've been doing this. So yeah, so that's how we make it make sense to people.
Thank you, Sharina. Thank you, Kiana. And thank you, Dr. Johnson. Michelle, if you will, in the process of talking about your organization, I can see people also thinking of this as like a box they need to check. Like, oh, okay, we had somebody come in once. We hired some more Black people. We've got one Black woman on the, in the C-suite. Like, we are good. Can you, as you address, or as you talk about how Shelton Holdings goes about their process, talk about the importance of understanding this as an iterative process, as an ongoing process for an organization?
Absolutely. Bless their hearts. Sure, I'd be glad to do that. Certainly for me, I'll just have to say that, first of all, if you really want to get serious about this, you can hire anyone who's on this panel to come in and support your organization. I think that it's critical that folks understand that if you knew how to do it, you'd already be there. So you definitely need to get expertise in helping you move your organization forward. And I have to say, when it comes to our company, Shelton Holdings LLC, I have a DBA, Michelle Shelton LLC, where I do a lot of this work. And in that, my team and I are able to address this company-wide within organizations. My background is in civil rights enforcement. So I started off my career a long time ago, doing as a civil rights enforcement officer, did a lot of work in our community and other underserved communities around workplace equality, education, and entrepreneurship. I've served as vice president of Tri-State Supplier Development Corporation, which was speaking to issues affecting Black entrepreneurs and making sure that they had access, if you will, to some of the larger contracts that our white counterparts just get handed, making sure that we had everything in place for us to be able to jump through the hoops, have the papers and all of that stuff. Okay. I'll just say the things that are put in front of us. But when it comes to doing this particular work, because of my background in civil rights enforcement, because of my background as holding the highest office in the state of Kentucky, overseeing diversity and equality, I've seen behind the curtain. I've seen behind the closed doors. I've seen enough to know that this isn't a game. So I'm not here for the games. I'm not here for the constant discussion, the communication that is much more focused on keeping white people comfortable than it is about making sure that we are achieving the gains that absolutely need to be achieved. I am tired of seeing the Black community be at the bottom of every single scale and indicator of quality of life, from education to housing to healthcare to employment. It's enough. And what we saw last year were people beyond just the Black community who also said, because of seeing images of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, who were not the first, and unfortunately we can say, I'm sure won't be the last, there were people beyond our communities who were standing with us and saying enough is enough. So much so that we saw these larger corporations putting out statements and saying, oh my goodness, we've got to make sure our employees know that we want to let them off from work for Juneteenth, because we realize how important it is now. We've got to put out a statement saying that we no longer support racist ideology and policy. We're going to become anti-racist. We're going to start reading books, and we're going to learn everything that it is that we can learn about Black folk and their struggles, and we're going to do what we can to support them. That's great. But here's the thing, we still have a lot of organizations who just think all they need to do is check off a box. So when it comes to our process, if I can speak to that, we pre-qualify our clients. I do not work with every organization that reaches out to me because, again, I'm not here for the games. I am here for those organizations that recognize that this is a problem. They recognize it is a problem, certainly to the points of my co-panelists that recognize it's a problem within their organization and they need to do something about it. And that something must be beyond just checking off, yes, we had someone come in for training. Companies are trying to understand. Initially, we were expected to create equal access. So we've got this EEO side where the government holds us responsible for making sure that we have representation in our roles, for making sure that if we, especially for those of us who want government funds, right, that we have some level of diversity within our organizations. But true diversity, equity, and inclusion speaks to, again, that intentionality part of making sure that you understand what it is, and more importantly, what it means for your particular company, what it looks like, and ultimately inclusivity is going to be what it feels like for folks when they come into your culture. Are they welcome? Are they embraced? And from an equity standpoint, do they have access to all of the benefits of your white employees? Period. From a compensation standpoint, from a benefits standpoint, from every aspect that you think you can create to make the employment experience so much better for white folks, are Black people and other people of color having those same experiences? Do they still have that access, and are they able to count on you to provide it? HR is not the place where this needs to happen. And what we have a lot of organizations realizing now is, well, we thought HR was taking care of that because we thought HR was the place that everything needed to be handled. And let me just say to you, and I talk quite a bit about this, that HR is not the place where you need to focus your diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. There needs to be intentional engagement from the CEO. For you who are entrepreneurs, as you're starting your company, you need to make this priority on your list. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just an HR function. It is an organizational development function. It speaks to your workforce. It speaks to your supply chain. It speaks to your culture. It speaks to everything that it makes up your company. And it's critical that you understand that. Asking HR to oversee diversity, equity, and inclusion is like asking a child who you just saw sneak a cookie out of the cookie jar right before dinner if they did that. What are they going to do? They're going to look at you and say, no, I didn't do that. Why? Because they don't want to suffer the consequences. If HR were capable of handling this, we wouldn't have the that we have in our workforces across the board. The Society for Human Resource Management did a study amongst HR professionals and said it's a problem workplace. 49% of Black HR professionals said yes, while only 13% of white HR professionals see racism as a problem in the workplace. HR is not the place that needs to handle, oversee, and maintain your DEI commitment. So it's critical to understand that it is an organizational development problem and you need to adapt at all levels. So yes, you need to have conversations, number one, to acknowledge the fact that you have your partner, our around securing that feedback, not just from your leaders who are going to tell us what you want everybody to know from public speak about your company, but we talk with all of your associates, all of your frontline people to hear what's happening at every level of the organization. I remember in my days of investigating workplace discrimination and sexual harassment, there were so many CEOs who were shocked, senior leaders who were shocked when they found out discrimination was occurring within their ranks. And a lot of that policies, we have beautiful mission, vision, and value statements that hang on the wall, but we don't hold ourselves accountable to making sure that that experience and that promise is maintained for every person at every level of our organization. I have worked over my career at every level of an organization, from receptionist all the way up to owning a company. So I use that to inform my work and my experience. So we help our clients have the conversations and then look at what do they need to do from a systemic standpoint, looking at their policies and procedures beyond just training and education for their teams. And we coach the leaders to be able to handle this work, to get prepared to do it. And then we stand with them, support them, and provide guidance to them as they go through looking at their internal cultures and systems to take care of eradicating the problems that continue to perpetuate the issues that they're having, and then ultimately become the inclusive and equitable organizations that they want to be.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I just want to say before we sort of wrap it up, just how incredible this experience has been. And for all of our panelists who are here, it's always such an incredible, it's hard to describe, but it's always such an incredible experience to hear other people, other Black women expressing their experiences in the workplace, and not just expressing their experiences, but also articulating the path forward. And so I just want to make sure that everybody understands that these are all, so Elephant in the Room, Visionarium, and Shelton Holdings LLC are all certified DE&I corporations that are here to work with your corporation if you are ready to make that next step and take those next steps. Make that commitment and take those next steps towards improving diversity, equity, and inclusion in your company. We do have a couple of questions. I am going to kind of wrap it up. We're kind of short on time. We've got 1 minute. So if you all can just look over in the chat, you're getting a lot of love and a lot of yes, absolutely. And I think honestly, Michael, that this is a conversation that could definitely be we could definitely continue on, because we didn't even talk about pay inequity. There's a lot of things that we just really didn't touch on. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Dr. Johnson, Sharina, Michelle, and Kiana for taking time out of your busy schedules to educate us around these important issues. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Michael.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, panel. And absolutely, Alicia, I think we should actually break down some of the things we've talked about today and maybe do a little bit more fine-tuned topics and really dive deep into the weeds. I think that's a great idea. We can make that a series, even do it every couple of weeks. Would love to. But yeah, thank you so much, panel. This is definitely eye-opening and a conversation that needs to continue. Obviously, we want to attract and maintain our talent, continue to bring in diversity in thought, and really just ensure that the employees that we do bring in feel as productive as possible, and welcome, right? So thank you again for joining us. Thank you for the attendees for bringing on the concept and welcoming the concept and taking some of the notes and bringing them to your companies. It's what we want you to do to really build the ecosystem. We need your help as well. But with that being said, I'll say thank you for joining. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Take care.